As an emergency room doctor at St. Mary's Hospital, I'd seen countless injuries, but something about this particular patient caught my attention immediately. His name was Alexander Mitchell, 28 years old, brought in with a severe laceration on his right forearm. "Hi, I'm Dr. James Carter," I introduced myself, trying to maintain professional composure despite being struck by his striking blue eyes. "What happened here?" "Rock climbing accident," he grimaced, holding his bleeding arm. The rope caught and cut pretty deep. I carefully examined the wound. It was indeed deep, requiring several stitches, but thankfully hadn't hit any major arteries. As I cleaned the wound, I couldn't help but notice his well-defined muscles. Clearly, he was an experienced climber. "You'll need about 12 stitches," I explained. "I'll numb the area first." "I trust you, Doc," he said with a slight smile that made my heart skip a beat. As I worked on his arm, we talked. He was an outdoor adventure guide, leading climbing and hiking expeditions. His passion for nature was evident in the way his eyes lit up as he described his work. "You must think I'm crazy, getting hurt doing something so dangerous." He laughed. I shook my head. "Actually, I admire it. Most of my excitement comes from dealing with other people's adventures. Maybe you need some adventure of your own," he suggested, his eyes meeting mine for a moment longer than necessary. I finished the last stitch, trying to ignore the flutter in my stomach. "All done. You'll need to come back in 10 days to have these removed." "Same doctor?" he asked, and I swore I detected hope in his voice. "I'll be here," I replied, perhaps too quickly. Over the next 10 days, I found myself thinking about Alexander more than I should. I told myself it was just professional concern, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. When he returned to have his stitches removed, he looked even better than I remembered. The cut had healed nicely, leaving only a faint line. "Looks like you did a great job, Dr. Carter," he said as I examined the healing wound. "James," I said suddenly. "You can call me James." He smiled. "Then you should call me Alex." As I removed the stitches, our conversation flowed easily. He told me about growing up in Colorado, his love for the outdoors developing early. I shared stories about my journey through medical school and my choice to specialize in emergency medicine. "You know," he said as I finished, "I'm leading a beginner hiking group this weekend. Nothing too strenuous. You should join us." I hesitated. Doctors weren't supposed to socialize with patients, but technically our doctor-patient relationship was ending with the removal of these stitches. "I'd like that," I heard myself say. He wrote down his number and the details for the hike. As he left, he turned back. "Looking forward to seeing you outside these hospital walls, James." That night, I couldn't sleep, thinking about those blue eyes and the invitation. It had been 2 years since my last relationship ended, and I'd thrown myself into work since then. Maybe it was time to take a chance on something, or someone. The hiking trail Alex chose was about an hour outside the city. When I arrived that Saturday morning, he was already there, greeting the small group of hikers. He brightened noticeably when he saw me. "You made it," he said, walking over. In his hiking gear, fitted t-shirt, cargo shorts, and boots, he looked even more attractive than in the hospital. "Couldn't pass up the chance for some adventure," I replied, trying to sound casual. The hike was beautiful, winding through forests and alongside a creek. Alex was an excellent guide, pointing out interesting plants and wildlife, making sure everyone was comfortable with the pace. But what struck me most was how often he found reasons to walk beside me, our shoulders occasionally brushing. "So, Carter," he said quietly during one such moment, "is this adventurous enough for you?" "Getting there," I smiled, "though I notice you're being extra careful with that arm." He laughed. "Well, I have a reputation to maintain. Can't keep showing up in your That would be terribly unprofessional of me to hope otherwise, wouldn't it?" Our eyes met, and something electric passed between us. The moment was broken by another hiker asking Alex a question about the trail ahead. After the hike, as the group dispersed, Alex approached me at my car. "There's a nice coffee shop in town," he said, "if you're not in a rush." We ended up spending 3 hours in that coffee shop, talking about everything and nothing. I learned that he'd come out to his parents in college, that his sister was his best friend, that he'd traveled to 17 countries. I told him about growing up in Boston, My decision to become a doctor. My last relationship that ended because my ex couldn't handle my unpredictable schedule. It takes a special kind of person to understand the demands of being a doctor. Alex said thoughtfully. The late nights, the emergencies, the emotional toll. Speaking from experience? I shook my head. No, but I'd like to learn. The directness of his statement took my breath away. Alex, I know there are complications. He continued. The whole doctor-patient thing. But technically, I'm not your patient anymore. And I'd really like to take you to dinner. I should have hesitated longer. I should have thought about the potential complications. The hospital gossip. The professional implications. Instead, I found myself saying, I'd like that too. Our first official date was the following Friday. Alex picked me up after my shift. And I was grateful I'd had time to change out of my scrubs. He took me to a small Italian restaurant tucked away in a quiet neighborhood. Hope you don't mind, he said as we were seated. I wanted somewhere we could talk without worrying about running into anyone from the hospital. The consideration touched me. Over wine and pasta, we delved deeper into each other's lives. Alex told me about his first climbing accident at 19 that had nearly scared him away from the sport. What made you go back? I asked. The realization that fear shouldn't stop you from pursuing what you love. He replied, his eyes holding mine. Sometimes the best things in life require taking risks. Later, as he walked me to my door, there was a moment of tension. That delicious uncertainty before a first kiss. Then Alex stepped closer, his hand gently cupping my face. I've wanted to do this since you first stitched up my arm. He murmured before pressing his lips to mine. The kiss was perfect, soft yet passionate, tentative yet sure. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathless. Would it be too forward to ask you out again tomorrow? He asked. His forehead resting against mine. I have the night shift. I regretfully informed him. Lunch then. Before your shift? I smiled, pulling him in for another kiss. Lunch sounds perfect. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of stolen moments between my hospital shifts and Alex's guiding schedules. We had lunch dates in the hospital cafeteria, quick coffee meetings between his tours, and whenever our schedules aligned, proper dates that left me feeling more and more certain that this was something special. One particularly memorable evening, after a grueling 12-hour shift dealing with a major car accident, I found Alex waiting outside the hospital with takeout from my favorite Thai place. You looked exhausted in your last text, he explained. I thought you might need this. We ended up on my couch, me still in my scrubs, sharing pad thai and telling each other about our days, as I described the difficult decisions I'd had to make during the accident victim's treatment. Alex listened intently, his hand running soothingly through my hair. How do you do it? He asked softly. How do you handle having people's lives in your hands? I leaned into his touch. Honestly, some days are harder than others. Today was rough. We lost one of the patients. Without a word, Alex pulled me closer, letting me rest my head on his chest. The steady beat of his heart was comforting. You know what amazes me about you? He said after a while. Your capacity to care, even after everything you see. You still care so deeply. I looked up at him, touched by his understanding. The kiss that followed was different from our previous ones, deeper, more intense, filled with need and emotion. Stay, I whispered against his lips. Stay the night. His eyes searched mine. Are you sure? In response, I stood up, taking his hand and leading him to my bedroom. That night, we made love for the first time, our bodies moving together with a passion that took my breath away. Alex's touches were both gentle and passionate, his kisses alternating between tender and demanding. Afterward, lying in his arms, I felt more content than I had in years. I think I'm falling for you, I admitted softly. He kissed my temple. I think I fell for you the moment you started stitching up my arm. The next morning, waking up to find Alex still there, watching me with those incredible blue eyes, felt surreal. Good morning, Dr. Carter, he smiled, pressing a kiss to my shoulder. Good morning, Mr. Mitchell, I replied, pulling him closer for a proper kiss. We started spending more and more time together. Alex began keeping some clothes at my place, and I found myself looking forward to coming home to find him there, usually cooking something delicious or working on his guide routes at my kitchen table. However, our relationship wasn't without its challenges. My unpredictable schedule meant canceled dates and interrupted moments. There were nights when I'd get called into emergency surgery just as we were settling in for dinner. Or mornings when my pager would go off before dawn. But Alex never complained. Instead, he adapted. He'd pack up our interrupted dinners and bring them to the hospital for me to eat between patients. He'd leave encouraging notes in my scrub pockets when I had particularly difficult cases. He'd be there with understanding and support. One night, after a successful but complicated surgery that had kept me at the hospital for nearly 20 hours, I came home to find Alex asleep on my couch. Medical journals spread around him. "What's all this?" I asked, waking him gently. He blinked sleepily. "I was reading up on trauma surgery. I wanted to understand more about what you do." In that moment, my heart swelled with emotion. This man, who spent his days scaling mountains and leading adventures, had spent his evenings studying medical texts just to better understand my world. "I love you," I blurted out, the words escaping before I could think better of it. His face broke into a brilliant smile. "I love you too, James, so much." As our relationship deepened, we faced new challenges. The hospital gossip mill had finally caught wind of our relationship. And while most of my colleagues were supportive, there were some who questioned the appropriateness of dating a former patient. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, my closest friend in the ER, pulled me aside one day. "James, you know I support you. But be careful. Dr. Thompson has been asking questions about how you met Alex." Dr. Thompson was the head of the ER department, known for his traditional views. The next day, I found myself called into his office. "Dr. Carter," he began, his expression stern, "I understand you're dating a former patient." "Yes, sir," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Alexander Mitchell. He was treated for a laceration. And our relationship began after his treatment was completed." He studied me for a long moment. "You're one of our best trauma surgeons. James, I'd hate to see your judgment questioned. With all due respect, sir, my personal life has never affected my professional performance. And it never will." After a tense discussion, he finally nodded. "See that it stays that way." That evening, I told Alex about the meeting. We were at his apartment, making dinner together, or rather, he was teaching me how to make his grandmother's lasagna recipe. "Maybe we should be more discreet," he suggested, concern evident in his voice. I put down the cheese I was grating and turned to face him. "No, I'm not hiding what we have. As long as we're professional about it, they can't do anything." He smiled, pulling me close. "Have I told you how sexy you are when you're assertive?" The lasagna was slightly overcooked that night, but neither of us minded. Our different careers continued to present challenges. Alex's guiding work often took him away for days at a time, leading expeditions into remote areas with no cell service. Meanwhile, my erratic hospital schedule meant I sometimes wouldn't see him for days, even when he was in town. One particularly difficult period came when Alex landed a prestigious guiding opportunity, a month-long expedition in the Rockies. It was an amazing opportunity for his career, but the timing coincided with a crucial period at the hospital as we prepared for a major trauma center certification. The night before he left, we lay in bed, my head on his chest as he played with my hair. "I'm going to miss this," he murmured. "This bed?" I teased. "You idiot." He laughed, then grew serious. "I've never felt this way about anyone before. Being away from you for a month." I propped myself up to look at him. "We'll make it work. You'll be amazing on this expedition. And I'll be here when you get back. Promise?" "Promise." During his absence, we communicated through satellite phone when possible and wrote old-fashioned letters that would be delivered whenever his group reached designated checkpoints. His letters were beautiful, describing the landscapes he encountered and how each sunset made him think of me. I threw myself into work, taking extra shifts to keep busy. But every time a climbing accident came into the ER, my heart would stop until I confirmed it wasn't from his expedition group. The night he returned, I was in surgery, deep into a complicated procedure. When he got home, he came straight to the hospital, waiting in my office until I finished. When I finally walked in at 3 a.m., exhausted but successful, finding him there felt like coming home. "Welcome back," I said softly. He crossed the room in 3 strides, pulling me into a passionate kiss. "God, I missed you." We barely made it back to my apartment, unable to keep our hands off each other. That night, Our lovemaking was intense and emotional. A month of separation fueling our desire. Afterward, as we lay tangled in the sheets, Alex traced the tired lines around my eyes. "You look exhausted. Have you been taking care of yourself?" I hadn't really. The combination of extra shifts and missing him had left me running on coffee and determination. "I'm better now that you're here," I said honestly. He kissed my forehead. "Move in with me." I blinked, surprised. "What? Or I'll move in here. I don't care which. I want to come home to you every night I'm in town. I want to take care of you when you're exhausted from saving lives. I want this. Us. All the time." The decision to move in together wasn't taken lightly. We spent weeks discussing logistics. His apartment was closer to the climbing gyms where he often taught. But mine was walking distance to the hospital. In the end, we chose my place, with Alex converting the spare room into a home office where he could plan his expeditions. Moving day was chaotic but fun. Alex's sister, Emma, came to help, and watching them bicker good-naturedly over where to place furniture reminded me of how much I'd come to love his family. They'd welcomed me warmly from the start. His mother, Linda, particularly pleased that her adventure-loving son was dating a doctor. "Just promise me you'll keep him safe," she'd said during our first meeting. "Mom," Alex had groaned, "I'm pretty sure James has seen enough climbing injuries to want to keep me safe anyway." As we settled into living together, we developed our own rhythm. Alex would wake early to go climbing or prepare for his tours, always making enough coffee for when I got up. I'd come home from night shifts to find breakfast waiting, even if he had to leave it in the fridge with a loving note. One morning, about 3 months after moving in together, I woke to find Alex sitting on the edge of our bed, looking troubled. "What's wrong?" I asked. Instantly alert, he handed me his phone, showing an email. It was an offer to lead a 6-month expedition in New Zealand. A dream opportunity for any climbing guide. "This is amazing," I said, even as my heart clenched at the thought of such a long separation. "I'm not going to take it," he said firmly. I sat up. "Alex, you can't turn this down. It's an incredible opportunity. I can't leave you for 6 months. Hey," I cupped his face in my hands. "Listen to me. This is your dream. We'll figure it out. We can do video calls. And maybe I can take some time off to visit halfway through." He leaned into my touch. "You'd do that? Take time off for me?" Of course. The smile that lit up his face was worth any sacrifice. We spent the rest of the morning planning how we'd manage the separation. And by the time he had to leave for work, he was excited about the opportunity again. That evening, I was in the ER when a severe trauma case came in, a young rock climber who'd fallen from a significant height. As I worked to save the patient's life, I couldn't help but think of Alex, of how this could be him someday. The surgery was successful, but it left me shaken. When I got home, Alex was waiting up, sensing something was wrong from my brief text earlier. "Want to talk about it?" he asked, pulling me into his arms. I told him about the patient, about my fears. "Sometimes I think about getting a call that you're being brought into my ER." "And James," he interrupted gently, "I can't promise nothing will ever happen to me. But I can promise that I'm always careful, always focused, and having you in my life gives me one more reason to come home safe." We made love that night with an intensity born of fear and reassurance. Each touch a promise, each kiss a declaration of love. The next few months were a whirlwind of preparation for Alex's New Zealand expedition. I threw myself into research about the area he'd be in, learning about the medical facilities nearby, making sure he had all the necessary vaccinations and medications. 2 weeks before his departure, I surprised him with a romantic weekend getaway to a mountain cabin. As we sat on the deck watching the sunset, sharing a bottle of wine, Alex turned to me with a serious expression. "I've been thinking," he said, taking my hand, "when I get back from New Zealand, would you consider making this official?" My heart stopped. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" He smiled nervously. "Maybe. I know we can't legally get married in every state yet, but we could have a ceremony. I want to commit to you, James. I want everyone to know that you're my person, my family." Tears welled up in my eyes as I looked at the man I loved, silhouetted against the setting sun. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes, I want that too." Alex pulled me into a kiss that tasted of wine and happiness and promises. We spent the rest of the weekend making plans. Not just for a ceremony but for our future together. We talked about buying a house someday. About the possibility of adopting children. About growing old together. The night before Alex left for New Zealand was bittersweet. We'd prepared everything. His gear was packed, his itinerary was set, and we had a detailed communication schedule planned out. Still, saying goodbye at the airport was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. 6 months, he reminded me, holding me close. It'll go by fast. Be safe. I whispered against his neck. Come back to me, always. The first month without him was the hardest. I threw myself into work, taking extra shifts to keep busy. Sarah noticed and started forcing me to take breaks, dragging me to the cafeteria for coffee. You're no good to your patients if you work yourself to exhaustion. She scolded. I know. I sighed. I just miss him. She squeezed my hand. Of course you do, but he'd want you to take care of yourself. Our video calls became the highlight of my weeks. Despite the time difference, we made it work. Alex would tell me about the magnificent landscapes he was exploring, and I'd share stories from the Sometimes we'd just sit in comfortable silence, working on our respective tasks while simply enjoying each other's virtual presence. 3 months into his trip, I managed to take 2 weeks off to visit him in New Zealand. Watching him in his element, confidently leading groups through some of the most beautiful terrain I'd ever seen, made me fall in love with him all over again. One evening, as we sat by a campfire after his group had gone to sleep, Alex pulled out a small box. I know we already talked about this, he said, opening it to reveal a simple platinum band. But I wanted to do it properly. My heart raced as he got down on one knee. James Carter, you make me want to be careful, to come home safe, to build a life that's about more than just the next climb. Will you marry me? You already know the answer. I laughed through tears, pulling him up for a kiss. He slipped the ring onto my finger. I know, but I wanted to see your face when I asked. The rest of my visit passed too quickly, but having the ring on my finger made the remaining 3 months more bearable. It was a constant reminder of what was waiting for me, of the future we were building together. Back at the hospital, my colleagues noticed the ring immediately. Most were supportive, though Dr. Thompson's congratulations seemed somewhat strained. But I found I didn't care anymore about others' opinions. What Alex and I had was real and worth any challenges we might face. I started planning our ceremony during quiet moments at work. Alex and I would exchange ideas during our calls, both wanting something intimate and meaningful rather than elaborate. We decided on a mountain location, combining my love for him and his love for the outdoors. The day Alex was due to return, I was a nervous wreck in the ER. Sarah practically pushed me out the door when my shift ended. Go get your man, she grinned, and tell him he owes me for keeping you sane these past 6 months. I waited at the airport, heart pounding as passengers from his flight began emerging. And then there he was, tanned and slightly thinner, but with that same brilliant smile that had first captured my heart in the He dropped his bags and ran to me, lifting me off my feet in a crushing embrace. God, I missed you, he breathed against my lips before kissing me deeply, not caring about the people around us. That night, as we lay in our bed, bodies entwined, Alex traced the ring on my finger. 3 months, he said softly. 3 months until I get to call you my husband. I kissed him tenderly. I love you, you know that. I know, he smiled. And I love you too, Dr. Carter, even if you did use way too many stitches on my arm that first day. I did not, I protested, laughing. Those stitches were perfectly spaced. He hummed, pulling me closer. Best medical treatment I ever received. As I drifted off to sleep in his arms, I thought about how a simple laceration had led to the greatest love of my life. Sometimes the best things really do come from taking risks, from saying yes to adventure, from allowing yourself to fall in love with a patient who became so much more. 3 years have passed since our wedding day. We said our vows on a mountain summit at sunrise, surrounded by our closest family and friends. Alex wore a suit that somehow still looked perfect despite the hike up. And I managed not to cry too much as we exchanged rings and promises. Life hasn't always been easy. We still deal with long separations when Alex leads expeditions, and my work at the hospital still means missed dinners and interrupted moments. But we've learned to make it work. to find joy in the small moments, and strengthen our commitment to each other. We bought a house last year. A beautiful place with mountain views and enough room for the twins we're in the process of adopting. The home office is now being converted into a nursery, and Alex's climbing gear shares space with my medical journals in what we jokingly call our adventure library. He still comes to the sometimes, though thankfully not as a patient. He'll bring me dinner during long shifts or just stop by to steal a kiss between his tours and my surgeries. The staff have gotten used to seeing him there, and even Dr. Thompson has warmed up to our relationship, especially after Alex helped organize a charity climbing event for the hospital's pediatric ward. Every now and then, I'll catch sight of my first set of stitches on his arm. Now just a faint silver line, and marvel at how one moment in the changed both our lives forever. It reminds me that sometimes the best treatments aren't found in medical textbooks, and that healing comes in many forms. Alex still teases me about using too many stitches that day, and I still maintain they were perfectly spaced. But we both know that without those stitches, without that moment of connection in a busy we might never have found our way to each other. Last week, as we lay in bed planning our next adventure, a combination medical mission and climbing expedition to Nepal, Alex turned to me with that same smile that still makes my heart skip a beat. "You know what, Dr. Carter Mitchell," he said, using the hyphenated name we'd chosen to share. "I think that arm injury was the best thing that ever happened to me." I couldn't help but agree. Sometimes, the most beautiful stories start with a little pain, a few stitches, and the courage to say yes to love. Ours certainly did, and every day, whether I'm in the saving lives or at home in Alex's arms. I'm thankful for that fateful day when a handsome climbing guide with a lacerated arm showed me that the greatest adventures aren't always found on mountain peaks. Sometimes, they're found in the simple act of falling in love.